Okay, so today's video is going to be on operations on fractions. Now the learning goals for today is by the end of the lesson you'll be able to correctly perform addition, subtraction, multiplication and division operations on fractions. So let's start off with fractions. So here you've got a fraction 3/4. I've written it as a fraction here and you can see it represented visually here. So just some terminology that we will be using throughout the video. So the denominator is the number that's on the bottom and the numerator is the number that's on the top. So denominator down, that helps me remember that it's on the bottom, and as I said, numerator on the top. So 3/4, the denominator shows you how many parts the whole has been divided into. So this has been divided into 1, 2, 3, 4 parts, and the numerator, which is your top number there, that tells you how many parts are selected or shaded. So we've got 1, 2, 3. So 3/4 means that something's divided into 4 parts and we've selected 3 of those 4 parts. So equivalent fractions. So equivalent fractions are fractions that represent equal portions of a whole amount, so therefore they're equal in value. So I'm going to do like an example of this. So let's take 1/2. So that's our whole. Our denominator says we've divided it into 2 parts, and our numerator says we've selected 1. So let's just pretend that's equally divided in half. So that's 1/2 represented visually. So let's look at, let's say 2/4. So that means of our whole, it's been divided equally into 4 parts. Yep, just pretend that's a circle and I've divided equally. So it's 4 parts as our denominator says, and our numerator says we've selected 2. So if we compare our pictures, you can see here 1/2 is actually equivalent to 2/4. So even though we've got different fractions, we've written 1/2 and 2/4, they're actually representing the exact same amount. So those are what we would call equivalent fractions. So it's important that you understand equivalent fractions because we actually use these when we do different operations on our fractions. Okay, so equivalent fractions are produced by multiplying or dividing the numerator and the denominator by the same whole number. So for example, let's look at our half example, 1/2. If we multiply the numerator by 2 and our denominator by 2, we're going to get an equivalent fraction. So 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4. So you can see 1/2 and 2/4 are equivalent fractions. So they represent the same amount and they're produced by multiplying both the numerator and the denominator by the same whole number. And as it says there, we can also do the same with division. So for instance, if we had 10/20, we can create an equivalent fraction. So let's say we divided both sides by 5. Divide by 5. So 20 divided by 5 is 4, 10 divided by 5 is 2. So that means 10/20 and 2/4 are equivalent fractions. Again, we could take that further and we could divide by 2 and divide by 2. And 2 divided by 2 is 1, 4 divided by 2 is 2. So you can see that 10/20, 2/4, 1/2, they're all equivalent fractions, and I created all those equivalent fractions by doing division. So equivalent fractions are produced by multiplying or dividing both the numerator and the denominator by the same whole number. Okay. The next thing that it's important to know is how to simplify. So the simplest form of a fraction is an equivalent fraction with the lowest possible whole numbers in the numerator and the denominator position. So this is achieved by dividing the numerator and the denominator by the highest common factor. So in our example, we have to simplify 12 over 18. So the highest common factor of 12 and 18, so the highest number that we can divide both of them by is going to be 6. So we can actually divide our numerator, divide that by 6, and our denominator, divide that by 6. So 12 divided by 6 will give us 2, 18 divided by 6 will give us 3. So 2/3. So that way we've simplified 12/18 into 2/3. So the next thing we do is adding and subtracting of fractions. So it's quite easy if we've got the denominators the same. So if the denominators are the same, we can simply add or subtract the numerators and the denominators actually remain the same. So 1/4 plus 1/4, we can just add. 1 plus 1 is 2, and as I said, our denominator stays the same. So that's 2/4. So what we're actually adding there was we had 1/4 plus 1/4. And if we add those together, that will give us 2/4. So you can see there that our denominator has to stay the same because we've still got the same amounts that the whole's been divided up into. It's just the numerators that we add together. And for our second one, it's the same for subtraction as long as the denominators are the same. So they both have a denominator of 7. So we can just do 5/7, take 3/7, 5 take 3 is 4, and that will leave us with 4/7. So quite straightforward as long as the denominators are the same. However, the denominators aren't always the same. So we've got a number of steps there that we'll have to carry out if our denominators are different. So step 1 is to find the lowest common multiple of the denominators. So our denominators here are 3 and 4. So 3 and 4. We have to find the lowest common multiple. So the easiest way to do that is just to start listing the multiples. So the multiples of 3 are 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, etc, etc, etc. We could go on forever. And the multiples of 4 are 4, 8, 12, 16. Again, we can go on forever. You can see there our common multiple, our lowest common multiple is 12. So we found our lowest common multiple. That's step 1. Done. We know it's 12. Step 2 is find equivalent fractions with their lowest common multiple as the denominator. So for 5/3, the lowest common multiple is going to be 12. And we need to get that 3 into a 12. So to do that, we have to multiply by 4 because 3 times 4 is 12. And remember, whatever we do to our denominator, we have to do our numerator as well. So 5 times 4 is 20, 3 times 4 is 12. And we'll do the same thing for our other fraction, which was 3/4. So on the bottom, we're going to do 4 times 3, which will give us 12. Up the top, 3 times 3, which will give us 9. Step 3 is add or subtract the numerators, keeping the denominators the same. So now they both, I'll just change colours just to make that clear. Now they've both got the same denominator of 12, so we can just carry out our operation. So 20 minus 9 will give us 11/12. And the last step is to simplify if necessary. We can't actually simplify there, that's as simple as it will go, so that will be our answer to that question. Okay, so we have another example in this one. We're trying to add together 1/6 plus 2/8. So step 1 was to find the lowest common multiple of our denominators. So we've got a denominator of 6, multiples of 6, 6, 12, 18, 24, so on. Multiples of 8, we've got 8, 16, 24. So you can see there our lowest common multiple of the two numbers is going to be 24. So then we have to write equivalent fractions with our denominator of each being 24. So we have to change our 1/6 into 24ths. So to do that, we had to multiply 6 by 4. So 6 times 4 will give us our denominator of 24. 1 times 4 will give us our numerator of 4. Because remember, whatever we do to our denominator, we have to do to our numerator. For our 2/8, to get the 8ths into 24ths, we have to multiply by 3. 8 times 3 is 24. And then we also have to multiply our numerator by 3. 2 times 3 will give us 6. From there, we can actually solve our equation just by adding our numerators together. So 4 plus 6 will give us 10. And remember, our denominators stay the same. So it's 10/24ths. And the last step is to simplify. Can we simplify that? Yes, we can. So to simplify, we can actually divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. 24 divided by 2 is 12. And we can't simplify any further, so our answer will be 5/12. Okay, mixed numbers. So mixed numbers are numbers that have whole numbers as well as fractions. So I've got an example here. So let's say we had 3 5/8 plus 2 3/4. So you can see there we've got mixed numbers. We've got whole numbers and we've also got fractions. So there's two different ways of doing it. I'm going to show you the way I prefer first, and that's to convert to improper fractions. So to do that, we have to turn the 3 5/8 into an improper fraction. So we do 8 multiplied by 3, which is 24, and then we add 5, which will give us 29. So we'll have 29/8. And then we'll convert our second fraction. So 4 multiplied by 2 will give us 8, plus 3 will give us 11. And then we can continue on solving that. So again, we have to find the lowest common multiple of 8 and 4. And this time our lowest common multiple is actually 8. So our first fraction can stay the same. So it can stay as 29/8. And our second fraction, we're going to multiply by 2 to turn it into 8ths. So that will give us 22/8. Oh, that's a bit messy. So from there we can add them together. So 29 plus 22 will give us 51/8. Now, if you want, you can leave the answer as is, but because the question gave us mixed numbers, not improper fractions, I prefer to convert back into mixed numbers. So to do that, we divide 51 by 8, and that will give us 6. Yep, 6 and 3 remainder, so 6 3/8 would be the answer as a mixed number. As I said, if you want to leave it as 51/8, that's fine, but because the question was asked in mixed numbers, I prefer to answer in mixed numbers as well. Now, I said there was another way of doing that question, so I'll clear the screen and I'll show you the second method of doing that. So we'll have our same question, which was 3 5/8 plus 2 3/4. It was 3/4. Sorry, I know as I'm writing the camera's kind of moving. Yeah, so apologies for that. So the other way you can do that is if you can move it so you add the whole numbers together. So you can do 3 plus 2 plus 5/8 plus 3/4. So 3 plus 2 will give you 5. So then you've got 5 plus 5/8 plus 3/4. Again, then we just solve how we normally do. So we find our lowest common multiple of 8 and 4, which we already know is going to be 8. So that stays as 5 plus 5/8. To get the 4 into 8ths, we have to multiply by 2. So that turns into 6/8. 5, and we can add our 5/8 plus our 6/8. So 5 plus 6 will give us 11/8. And we can change that into a mixed number as well. 11 divided by 8 is 1, so it will give us 6 3/8. So that's the two different ways of doing it. Personally, I prefer the first method of converting into improper fractions because it comes in handy later on when you're doing different types of equations. But if you prefer the second method, that's fine. You can use either way. Okay, so the next thing we're going to go into is multiplying by fractions. So multiplying fractions is actually super easy. When we multiply fractions together, we multiply the numerators together, and then we multiply the denominators together. It's that easy. So if we have 1/2 of 3/4, so 1/2 of 3/4 actually means multiply. So of just means multiply. So 1/2 of 3/4 means 1/2 multiplied by 3/4. 1 times 3 is 3. 2 times 4 is 8. 3/8. It's as easy as that. That's how you multiply your fractions. Okay, so some more examples. Let's do 2/7 multiplied by 3/5. So 2 times 3 is 6. 7 times 5 is 35. Okay, so can we simplify that any further? No, so that will be our answer there. Now, I'm going to do an example using mixed numbers, and we'll work through that one. So let's say we had 3 and 1/3, and we want to multiply that by 2 and 2/5. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to convert that mixed number into an improper fraction. So the first one, 3 and 1/3, 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10, so that leaves us with 10/3. And the second one, 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12, so 12/5. So from there we can multiply. 10 times 12 is 120. 3 times 5 is 15. So we can simplify our fraction further there. So if we divide both of them by 5, so 120 divided by 5 is 24. And 15 divided by 5 is 3. We can actually even simplify that further and divide both by 3. So 24 divided by 3 is 8, and 3 divided by 3 is 1. So when we have a fraction like that, we can just rewrite it as 8. So anything over 1, we just kind of drop the denominator and just keep the numerator there. So 8 whole. So 3 and 1/3 times 2 and 2/5 will give us an answer of 8. Okay, so the next thing is dividing fractions. So dividing fractions is also very simple. You just have to remember a few rules. Well, one rule actually. So when dividing fractions, you must multiply the first fraction by its reciprocal. And what do I mean by reciprocal? Well, the reciprocal is when you just kind of flip your numerator and your denominator. So in our example here, our 2/5, we are going to turn that into a multiplication, and we've got to multiply by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 1/3 is actually 3 over 1. So you can see that we've switched it. Our denominator has become 1 and our numerator has become 3. And from there we can just solve like a normal multiplication. So 2 times 3 is 6, and 5 times 1 is 5. And you can leave it like that, or you can turn it into a mixed number if you want. So I will turn it into a mixed number. So that's 1 and 1/5. So just remember, when you're dividing, first you have to turn the division sign into a multiplication sign, and you also have to multiply by the reciprocal of the fraction. So switch it around, turn the numerator into the denominator and the denominator into the numerator. So a few more examples. Let's go 5 over 6 divided by 2/5. Sorry about that. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn our division sign into a multiplication and do the reciprocal of 2/5. So it becomes 5/6 multiplied by 5/2. So 5 times 5 is 25. 6 times 2 is 12. And we can turn that into a mixed number, which is 2 and 1/12. There we go. Another example, I'll just clear the screen and we can do another example. 2/5. Divide that by 3/7. Okay, so the first thing we do is turn our division sign into a multiplication sign and turn our 3/7 into its reciprocal fraction. So that becomes 2/5 multiplied by 7/3. So 2 times 7 is 14. 5 times 3 is 15. So that's 14/15. And we can't actually simplify that further, so we just leave that answer as is. And that's all I've got for you guys today. So we've gone over addition and subtraction, we've gone over multiplication, and we've gone over division. So I know it's a lot and it's been a long video, so make sure you get into the textbook exercises in class and really start practicing these, memorizing how to do it, and it should be pretty easy once you've gone over quite a few examples.